Yes, there's abundant evidence to show how every man with a wireless set began to take the thing seriously. Broadcasting, from being a toy and a novelty, became an essential part of our domestic life. Now, how many of you listeners are dance band fans, I just wouldn't know. What I do most certainly know is that dance music, or popular music if you like, has been from the start a very gay accompaniment to these radio times. To begin with, I have an idea that many of us feel very pleasantly sentimental on hearing those early broadcasting bands. How many of us whose dancing nowadays is pretty creaky, to say the least of it, once gaily took the floor to the Savoy Havana Band and a tune like this. In fact, the whole story of dance music is packed with famous names and good stories. Even if we had a whole program, I doubt if we could deal properly with what I might call the evolution of the dance band. And in a way, I'm glad I don't have to try. But now, was that one tune we thought important enough to open our chapter with tonight? If you remember, I promised we'd come back to it. This is how it went. But here is someone whose name and voice were just the whole BBC, so far as some of us was concerned. And that's his signature tune we've just heard, Jack Payne.
Thank you. But, pardon me, is this going to be the candid microphone? I mean, do you want me to start at the beginning?
That's always the best idea.
Well, in that case, you really ought to call me Uncle Jack, you know.
Right, good evening, Uncle Jack.
Well, that's how I was first announced on the air. This is 2LO calling, hello, children, here is Uncle Jack with his orchestra playing from the Hotel Cecil.
Everybody really important in broadcasting seemed to be uncle or aunt.
Yes, there were Uncle Arthur, Uncle Reg, Uncle Caractacus. Still, I'm very proud of my children's hour days. Of course, it had its drawbacks, you know. For instance, when I'm introduced these days to very grown-up young women with 3 or 4 youngsters of their own, and they say, oh, I remember listening to you when I was in the nursery. I always made sure that somewhere in each of my programs were a few tunes that would appeal especially to children, particularly when I later joined the BBC. Something like Sergeant Flagg and Sergeant Quirt, or Breathing on the Window, or Riding on a Camel in the Desert, or I wonder, do you remember this one?
We are a ragtime army, once the soldiers used to shout. Skinnamarlink's the reason why the ditty came about. When in all his glory he appeared upon parade, the troops would start to hoist their slacks and sing the anchors weighed. Well, you know what sailors are, who has two wonderful eyes of grey.
Skinnamarlink the sergeant,
Who has one black as a rule, they say.
Skinnamarlink the sergeant,
Who is it breaks a girl's heart in twain, breaks it to pieces and swishes his cane, and who is it sticks it together again?
Skinnamarlink the sergeant.
Nonsense, of course, but it was fun to put over those pleasant, silly little tunes and make some of them hits overnight.
After those first broadcasts from the hotel, you became a fixture at Savoy Hill?
Yes, it happened like this. I was asked to take my band to the studios and give an audition. Gerald Cock, Roger Eckersley, Percy Pitt, and several other chiefs of departments heard us. They appeared to like us, and we were engaged as the house band. In those days, I had, I think, 12 instrumentalists. Everybody knew Sidney Furman's 2LO dance band, but it was decided that we should be called the BBC Dance Orchestra. I was rather solemnly told that this was so that we shouldn't be confused with the symphony orchestra. The BBC also insisted that the billing should be personally conducted by. But as I pointed out, how else could I conduct except personally?
Of course.
So I won the day, and forever afterwards we were announced as Jack Payne and the BBC Dance Orchestra.
I suppose conditions were pretty different in those days.
Well, 25 years is a long stretch, you know, and it would be quite absurd to say there were no changes. I noticed them most when I remember the names of my friends in those days. Just one example. How many people remember that my arranger was Ray Noble? Then Jack Jackson was my trumpet player. Bob Busby played the piano for me. Billy Thorburn, Billy Scott Coomber, and Poggy Pogson were all in the band, and many others, of course, who are now leading their own bands or have made names for themselves in show business. Billy Mayle was making his name, not with me, of course, and DeBroy Summers was already famous with his Savoy Orpheans. And there was a good-looking young second alto player who had been at Yale and thought he could sing. Nobody else thought so over here, but he went back to America and was the Sinatra of his day. That was Rudy Valley.
Everything I have is yours, you're part of me. Everything I have is yours, my destiny. I would gladly give the sun to you if the sun were only mine.
Radio was growing up, but in some ways, of course, it was, a little naive. I was always highly amused by the card which was handed to new artists. It said, "No gags on Scotsmen, Welshmen, clergymen, drink or medical matters. And do not sneeze at the microphone."
Well, this isn't really the time or place to start a discussion, but I want to know, what about the changes in style, for instance?
Well, to my mind, I don't know if everyone will agree, there was much more individuality about dance music in those days. This is my personal opinion, of course, but I think today one can have too much over-orchestration and, too many clever arrangements. We had all the fun in the world with plenty of 6/8s and 2/4s. Tunes like the Stein Song and Swinging on a 5-barred Gate and that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
There was more romance and less business about those days. Sometimes I'd hear a new song in the morning and we'd busk a couple of choruses on the air with it at 5:15 in the afternoon. Then Ray Noble would get going and we'd have the whole thing ready for broadcasting with full orchestrations within a couple of days.
That's incredible. Things happened in the 20s that could never happen today. Well, it's a fine record, and thanks, Jack Payne, for reminding us of your part in what we may also call these tuneful times.